Welcome to Backyard Philosophy, a podcast where a couple friends grab some cold ones, sit around the fire, and talk about science, philosophy, and history. Crack one open, sit back, and get a good laugh as we discuss everything from automation to why the meaning of life is 42.
We're going to talk about a moral dilemma I have regarding land management and invasive species and what plants should be there, what plants shouldn't be there, who's going to pay for it, whose responsibility is it. We got three people on the podcast today. This is Nick talking. I'm drinking some 1835 bourbon made in Tejas, which is where we're sitting. We got Dan here, first time on the podcast. Dan, how you doing? What are you drinking?
Well, first off, I'd like to say thank you guys for inviting me on the podcast because I am definitely nowhere near qualified to talk about this current topic. But currently I'm drinking some Jack Daniels because Mike says that Corona is just a little too trashy. But what about you, Mike? What are you drinking today?
I'm drinking some Old Forester because I am classy and I drink Corona like a little bitch. But overall, I'm doing good. I'm happy we're in Texas. It's warm, no more cold. And Nick, this is a delicate question, but definitely in your wheelhouse. So why don't you begin?
All right, so here's our dilemma. So we recently did a clear cut, a harvest around this area. Not in the area. So the ground I'm talking about, we have 1.5 acres of grassland because trees can't grow there. It's too wet. All right, it's too wet for trees. So you're pretty much only going to get grass.
Is this lowland or does it just happen to be too wet? Is it like on a hill or?
It's just the drainage where it's at. It's near the stream, but it shouldn't be. It's just one of those change
not
in the
ideal
landscape.
Locations for it.
Yeah, it's not ideal location for a forest. And you need a patchwork of landscapes to create good habitat for deer and elk browse. Grass is essential for their survival. It's a place of constant nourishment. So the problem is we cut around it and we replanted it. And we tried to replant this area. But it's so wet, it's too wet for the trees to grow. Some trees took hold, but not all of them. And it's pretty much going to be grassland just because of how wet it is. We planted some tree species that are more used to the wet soil. And some of them are going to take, but some aren't. Now, the problem is Himalayan blackberry. It's an invasive species. That same delicious blackberry everyone loves to eat. It's not supposed to be here. Left unchecked, this blackberry is going to overtake all the grass, and it's not going to be useful for the deer or elk. It's going to be just a thing of blackberry. You can't walk in there. It's all, it's got thorns. Now, there's water flowing through it.
For this scenario, is this public or private? Because I want to know what the end goal is for planting trees in this location.
Excellent question. So this is private ground. This is private timber company ground. The objective of this ground is to grow trees. Now, that being said, as a private timber company, we still care about the environment. We don't want this ground to just be invasive species. I mean, no one does. Like, that's the thing about invasive species. They're not preferred. So we're essentially, all of us are losing this ground no matter what, because it's either, we're trying to plant it. With the trees, what they do is they're going to grow and they're going to crowd out that blackberry, ideally, or the blackberry is going to crowd out the grass. But to me, it seems like the grass is leaving either way. Now, we have a few things. So we can treat individually the Himalayan blackberry with an herbicide that kills just that blackberry, and it can keep the grass there. The problem is blackberries, the seed's out there. We're never going to get rid of it unless we go through with a fine-tooth comb. We're not going to do that. Now, management-wise, you have a few ways to continue this. Like I said, we planted all trees, grows into a forest. You're still losing that grassland, not preferred, for the deer and elk and just biodiversity. Well, do nothing. Turns into a blackberry patch, not preferred. Now, the ideal scenario is we come in, every 2-3 years, we treat the blackberries, keep it a grassland. We cannot use herbicides within 10 feet of water. Now, it's a small area. It's 1.5 acres. You can use some kind of digging tool, a shovel, machete. You can kill the blackberry every so often so that the grassland stays a grassland, but you'll never completely get rid of it with the technology we have today. So my question is, our objective is obviously to make money grow trees. We're a timber company. That being said, we're hunters. We enjoy deer and elk. People come on our land, they enjoy shooting deer and elk. Ideally, it'd be a grassland. It's not going to be support trees, but we have this invasive species. We can't treat with herbicide, which is the cheapest way to do it. You can do it manually. It costs more, but you'll never get rid of it. So do you think the state should step in? When we kind of like CRP, we let the state handle this. Now, what do you guys think about, like I said, just turning it into planting a bunch of trees? Is that the right answer?
So if I'm dealing with this from a private perspective, since it's private land and it's private business, I think this should still deal with the companies, should not involve the federal government. My first scenario is going in with a torch, a controlled burn everything, get rid of the blackberry, that way you control, and maybe plant some deep rooting grass so that way it can help soak in the water. So maybe on the higher end, away from the river, you can plant in some like water-based trees. But the first things first, should be on the individual private organization, not the federal government. Secondly, I think a controlled burn, or just, granted it might be the pyromaniac in me of, hey, get the flamethrowers out. Because, I mean, like you said, Nick, you can't get the blackberry berries, so burn it all. Do a controlled burn, get rid of it all. It's a wetland, so I'm not too worried about an uncontrolled burn, and such like it's private land, it's probably could be done quite efficiently. And then replant grassland for the hunters, farmers, and if you can, now that there's less competition for blackberries, plant some trees like a I don't know the trees in that,
like a cedar or
like
a grand
willow
fir,
or something.
willow.
Yeah.
They're more wet species. They can survive with wetter soils.
but something preferably native to that territory, so that way we're not introducing other native invasive species or something along those lines of, like you said, with cedar and willow and such, but just native to that area, native grass. That way you get the best of both worlds. Granted, that land, it's not going to be high production of trees, but something's better than nothing.
Yeah, no, obviously I definitely do not have any sort of experience or qualifications to talk about this, but this probably is just the business person in me. I mean, do you guys have a timetable as to when you would want to, or need to get that project done?
So when we plant around it, we're going to come back and harvest those trees around there in 30, 40 years. From a purely business perspective, not morals at all, the objective would be to plant trees to reduce the invasive species that are going to harm more trees, because the blackberries are going to grow a lot faster than our trees are going to overcrowd them. It's going to make it's harmful to our business. Every acre has value. So if we can put trees there, we're going to get a return there. Now it's not like what you think a classic swampland. So it's not wet all the year, which is why we're allowed to go in there with equipment, but it is wet most of the year. It's wetter than the surrounding soil just based on drainage. And so to me, the big question is morally, from like a land perspective, like the right thing to do is kind of unclear, because we don't want it to be invasive. We want it to be diverse. We need grassland. Planting trees kind of takes up some of that light resource, takes it away from the invasive species. We can't operate within certain feet of water with herbicides to get rid of it. So we're kind of stuck in this area of, we can't grow trees here, but we can't really do anything else. So how do we, and as a business, and I'm sure people are going to say this is not correct, as a business, we can't be spending all of our time trying to get rid of invasive species.
So to that point, I guess like what I was trying to get after was, depending on the timetable of like when you guys would need to get the trees planted so that they have the best chance to grow, what I would say is, is there any chance for you guys to get any sort of like locals or, like kind of free help, whether it's internships or, I don't know, geologists, or what's the proper term for someone who, investigates
Volunteers?
Not volunteers. I'm talking like specifically like,
like a botanist
like
or
a botanist or
something
along those lines. If they would be willing to go in there and do the manual labor themselves, and if that was able, if they were able to go in, a couple days a week for a month, and then at that point it was relatively clear so that you guys could start planting. I know you were just talking that the trees do have a long time and that to begin to get growing, and that obviously the berries would overrun them. But if there was a chance that you guys would be able to get free labor so that your company's not wasting that time and you're quote unquote following the ethical principles, so you're not using herbicides, you're not, maybe obviously you guys are very skilled at what you do, but you're not taking any unnecessary risk with like flamethrowers like Mike was talking about. I'm just saying. But I mean, if
I
it
like
was,
fire.
I know you do, and I do too. But just trying to think of it from that perspective. I mean, if you were able to kind of get the free labor, so you guys can continue to expand in other areas, but then come back to this spot that you guys are, like, okay, we definitely should and need to build trees here for our business. If you guys could go that route, I don't know if that's feasible for you based on your operating cycles, but.
No, I do. That's actually like a really good idea. I'd like that because that's a problem we have with the timber industry. Working in natural resources, we see a lot of activists who want to protect the environment, but when it steps up to the plate of like who's doing the work, we oftentimes foot the bill for doing this kind of work and still being branded as the bad guys. It'd be nice to give these people who want to help the environment a chance to do that, and then it's no money out of our pocket. Everyone benefits. That's honestly that's a really good idea. I like that.
I do have a question. Is the invasive blackberry, is it mainly passed through scat for birds and deer, or can it be passed through the water? Because you did say it's near a river.
I think it's probably mainly passed through scat. Blackberries, bears really enjoy it, and deer will eat the leaves so we have creeping blackberry, which is a native blackberry species, but this Himalayan blackberry, I think the deer will eat as well. They'll eat the leaves, but they won't eat the berries. But the bears like sweet things, bears eat berries. They'll spread it around, and you can tell, like if you're walking around in the woods, and there's no reason a blackberry should be there. Typically, invasive species spread along the road systems, cars, people running over, gets shot out of the wheel somewhere, and you'll find it in the middle of nowhere. You look around, there's usually bear shit all around. It's where bears like to go. So I'd say once it gets past the roads, bears are the ones spreading it around.
And my second caveat is, like you mentioned, the blackberry has a turn rate of growing much faster than most trees. Is there a native species you can use that has like a shrubbery or something to take up the land space to help prevent it? So that way you're using a short tree, which in the long term can keep blackberry out, and you could also in the short term use it to solidify the land so you don't have to remove any invasive species, so you can plant other stuff. So you can use not like a bush tree, a small tree to just prevent blackberry, and then long term, like if the landscape changes, you plant in more trees once the land becomes dry, or just a preventive measure that is much easier to grow than a traditional tree.
A shrubbery? Yeah, no, that's definitely an option. Like different species respond differently to the amount of water, so you could plant some sedges and stuff there that are more adapted to the water. That's definitely an option. Like I said, again, the problem is industry standard. We don't really plant anything other than trees. So that would be like Dan's saying, some volunteers come in, or we have some kind of system to help us buy that. We're really like I said, I plant trees. I don't plant other species, but that's something I've kind of thought about, especially with road edges, of planting some kind of species that is native and fast growing, but doesn't grow up tall, that prohibits getting a little bit off topic, but yeah, that's definitely preventative. Yeah, something that grows a little bit faster. Now the problem is there's not that many things that grow faster than an invasive species, and that's part of the issue. Pretty much we're trying to limit something to grow faster than the invasive species. There really isn't that much because everything else is adapted to dealing with certain enemies. There's a certain kind of standardish growth rate. And so you lose and gain a certain amount. And invasive species are so deadly because they don't have predators. So whatever we plant that's native has to account for predators, whereas this invasive species, all the energy that's going into defense they can kind of take that out because they're not being preyed upon. But I do like the planting invasive species one. That is an option. Now, we're planting a native species. Even planting an invasive that's not as deadly. So say, potentially, what if we planted another grass species that's not native, but still counts as deer elk browse, that just goes faster than the native grasses. Now, again, you have to be careful when introducing non-natives to the environment.
So two things. I don't think that's a good idea because, grass has a quite fast rate of spreading, and I imagine this could be grazing land. They have a high chance of getting their scat and spreading out. So I don't think that's a good idea. But I do have a question for Dan with the volunteer work. I'm not quite familiar with how close it is to a road or how far it is for a volunteer to travel. If it's close, absolutely. Because I can see like a big thing for all of us growing up was a forest preserve where you can go and clean, help. That was a very common thing to do. But I'm not gonna lie, if I have to travel 3 hours and hike and get to it, I I feel like I'm not going to do that, and I feel like a lot of other people aren't going to do that. So maybe we have a multiple implement plan. So close land, volunteers, far land. I'm curious about inland where it's harder for a volunteer to get into. And since Danny brought volunteer, I'd be curious to hear what your opinion is on that.
Well, again, just based off of Nick, stating that they, want to follow the proper guidelines, ethical, that the code, so to speak, with their industry. I mean, I was just kind of looking, more the litigious side, so that avoid those kind of issues. But at the same time, again, they're talking about not wasting any resources like individuals. Like, I'm sure what you guys could easily do at some point is send somebody out with a digger and like dig out that area so that it doesn't grow past a certain point. But then again, if any sort of animals get in there, it can still spread. Like the animal will cross that little trench. So, but I mean, obviously my original idea would have to be predicated on that it's fairly easy to get to. But at the same time, I think that if, social media is cheap and easy, you don't have to, you can pay somebody, pretty cheaply to like post
You're
and make
asking
sure
a lot there for foresters to be good at social media.
Hey,
Can confirm, good buddy.
hey, that's fine. But you have a cheap intern that can take care of the social media at the same time, someone who's just starting out, but is fairly versed in, the technology.
The low man and totem rule.
Exactly. If that's their job, if somebody's able to get the word out there without spending a lot, so you're not paying for radio, TV ads, or printing out anything, it's, you're just posting to social media and, just the internet in general. If you do your part that way and people are willing to volunteer and make the trek, even if it is hey, it's an hour drive, then an hour and a half or so hike, and that's going to be a few hours of work, probably for a couple of days. If they're willing to do that, then no matter what, Nick's company has definitely done their job, and trying to stick to the code of ethics, that they have to adhere to, and just environmental laws. But it really depends on the individuals who would be willing to do that work. I mean, I was trying to think of, okay, how do we not have them spend an unnecessary amount of money or put resources just in somewhere that it's going to affect other operations on a day-to-day, but ultimately still achieve their goal at some point down the road.
I want to piggyback on what Dan says, because I'm thinking you could very easily do a pro quo. Since it's private land, people aren't allowed usually to hike it because it's private land. If volunteers volunteer, they might get free access to go hike in the woods, some land that's mostly not public, and that might be a great incentive for people. And my other secondary thought would be, why does it have to be grasses? Could we possibly use weeds? Weeds tend to be high survival rate, use a native weed that I feel like would very easily take over the land and still not highly affect the ecosystem.
Yeah, so two things. Remind me to get back to weeds and grasses if I get off topic. So yeah, this land that we're talking about specifically is pretty close to a road, so it's pretty easy access. And that is something, okay, so a private timber company, we put up gates to keep people out. Now, we keep people out because the main one is kids have a tendency to just four-wheel across our roads.
People are awful.
Yeah, just destroy our roads, which we need to replant trees, do our operations, and people dump trash. Just a lot of bad things come with open access. Now, at the same time, we don't want, us personally, we don't sit around and be like, how do we keep people from our grounds? We sit around like, okay, we have time to do this, and this. And as people do more harm to our ground, it's easier for us to put up a gate than constantly be picking up trash. It sucks. I know we close off all that land, and sometimes public land is behind that, but there's nothing we can do there.
But if they're volunteer, I'm going to assume they enjoy the environment and they're not going to be litterers, which are god-awful people. So
right. So the point I'm getting is we have these gates up, and I'm not trying to say we'll open the gates if you guys do this for us, but it would be an interesting system of, okay, these are our private lands. If you guys come in and you take care of these native grounds, you remove the invasive weeds for us in this area that's, again, doesn't help us financially at all. As a timber company, we get paid to grow trees. Growing grasses is something we do for the environment, doesn't help us financially at all. If we let these guys come in, take ownership of the land, they get rid of these invasive species for us in this area, help us out, we'll help them out, we open it up for them to hunt during the hunting season. Now, each timber company is different. Not everyone does this. Our company, the company I work for, they open up a lot of their land for hunters during the hunting season just because we want to create goodwill. But I think that's something that could be explored too. It sounds like we're forcing people to help us. And that's not what I want to get to, but that seems like a pretty good incentive at the same time of, hey, look, we have these issues with the environment. labor is expensive. We don't want to fuck over the environment, but at the same time, we can't afford to be doing all this work for something that doesn't benefit us financially because we are a business.
So I'm not a big fan of communism, but it seems like a very symbiotic relationship of, hey, you do some work, we allow you to hunt to get your own resources. It's very help your own neighbor-ish, but it's still, at the end of the day, everyone looking for themselves. So you can help the environment and still help yourself at the same time.
And at the same time, like Nick was mentioning, just building a solid relationship, and just kind of forging that bond. I mean, if you were able to do that with, fairly, I don't know how many, activists or, just groups are in your area specifically, but there are plenty across the country and across the world. I mean, if you were able to, forge a bond or at least, start, to build those relationships with individuals like that. I mean, I don't know how many issues you guys might have with many protests on your lands or causing issues. I don't know. But maybe you, kind of ease any tensions that you may or may not, incur on a daily basis. And again, like we're here to make money, but again, we care about the environment, and unfortunately, this is not something we can spend all of our time and resources on, and we would appreciate it if you were to help us out. We are willing to work with you and listen to you on certain topics or certain issues. So I don't know.
Yeah, and that's so to kind of give you guys a breakdown. So we're an industrial forest ground, so we interact with the same people who public landowners interact with. We have everyone from quote unquote hippies to people who just want to come and ride dirt bikes on our ground. And each of those people, if we own land that's people want a dirt bike on, I could see a relationship being formed there of like, hey, like we understand you guys want to recreate. We get it. I mean, I know we have foresters who do the same thing in our company. They just want to ride their dirt bikes around. And who doesn't? So we can work something out. Our main thing as a forest products industry is we want to educate people about the environment, right? We want to explain to people why we don't want petroleum products near the water. We don't want ruts formed during the wet season. We want to minimize the impact of human interaction on the environment. So we do things when it's safe. And that we, as a company, and just as foresters, I mean, no one gets into forestry if they don't love being outside. We want to value the environment. So using this relationship, like Dan, you guys brought up, of a relationship between the people who want to come on the land and us, of saying, hey, we're going to open this up for you, some kind of agreement. This is like your chores list, essentially. Like you guys help us out with this, and we'll let you come ride your dirt bikes or pick mushrooms, pick strawberries, pick blackberries, whatever it is you want to do. We can work with you if you work with us.
You quite literally reap what you sow. That's very good. This is kind of a little off topic, but going back to your original problem. What about changing the soil? Could you possibly add more in rocks to make it more solidified ground? Could you, I don't know the laws of changing a river. Could you possibly divert it a little bit?
Financially, it doesn't make sense to change where the water is flowing. You got to have machinery come in or bring soil in, and we move soil around a lot, so it's not really that. It's more of just
a lot of work for no results.
It's a lot of work for little results. Like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, we'll break even. So, and we do that in forestry all the time. You have a big, like a snowstorm come through, which happened to us recently. Mike, you know all about snowstorms.
We're in Texas. Be careful.
Big snowstorm comes through. It knocks out a lot of trees. So what do we come in? Or power. Same thing happened to us like last year. We just didn't make the news. And so we came in, we cut the trees that we had a company come in. They cut all the trees that broke off halfway. Different species, different trees, genetics. It's all come down to genetics, essentially. Different trees can survive different stressors. These trees didn't. We come in, we cut them. We recouped some of the rewards from that. We didn't really make a lot of money, but we did remove fuel from the landscape, which is kind of an insurance when it comes to wildfire. So in a sense, nature comes in and happens, and it kind of messes things up. But you got to be prepared for that. But as a forest products industry, taking an L on money isn't it's not uncommon. Yeah.
What about flooding it? So stay with me. This might be a crazy idea, but if you put trees underneath the water, they don't rot because there's no oxygen. They're waterlogged, but you can dry them out and they don't rot. They stay alive forever. So if you flood that ground, and so you store logs there, and it's right next to the river, so you can simply, when you need them, float them on down the river. So you sink them, and you just use it as a storage capacity for timber.
So that's pretty frowned upon, not going to lie.
Why?
We don't move logs down the river anymore because they tend to scrape up the river bottom, which is what salmon and steelhead use to move upstream. Japan, actually, they do similar thing to what you're talking about. Now, in the United States, you'll see big log decks of just logs stacked on top of logs with sprinklers that put water on them to reduce decomposition. In Japan, what they do is they'll lay them out in the bay, put cords all across them, and then sink them, and they go down. And then when they need them, press a button, they pop right up to the surface because they float, bring them up, saw them.
She's a witch if she floats.
Exactly. Now, the problem with that is estuaries, which is where these are mainly stored, they're pretty a biodiverse region in the United States. We don't really want to mess with that. We want to let native species flourish. We'd rather pump the water up, spray them. Honestly, either way, right or wrong, it's everything humans do, we interact in the environment in some way. It's hard to say this is right, this is wrong. Japan, they're using a lot less materials to store their trees, but they're taking away native habitat from the species. It's really just a matter of opinion of what's right and what's wrong. But I don't think, now, to be fair, if we did flood it, no more blackberry. That is an idea, because you could build up berms, you create standing water, you create a pool. So what you're doing there, you create a pool of water, which not only wildlife habitat, okay, you have a lot of music species, wet species there, so you have a lot of salamanders, insects, stuff
frogs, et cetera, et cetera.
Frogs, etc. But you also have wildfire season. You have water storage. During the summer, you need water, you just back up, fill with your draft hose, and you have water available right there. That is an option. I mean, you could, in that way, Himalayan blackberries, invasive species, they don't grow underwater. So that honestly is an option.
Sorry, Dan, I don't mean to interrupt, but what about this will kind of be a fuel source, but cover the land with bark, because I know that's quite common to do for if you want to stop growing weeds or something like that. Cover it with bark and stuff like that. I don't really see that being a viable solution, but I'm just throwing it out there for shits and giggles.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that you could do. That's pretty common in California. They have...
All right, so we should definitely not do that then.
You're not wrong.
Yikes.
California, just because their regulations, they have a lot of crazy ideas. So they do a lot of crazy things with bark, trying to reuse that fuel, that bioenergy, that resource. The thing with bark is you'll oftentimes see... So when logs are processed on a landing, they'll not really as much in the northwest, but more like in the southeast, on your neck of the woods. In the banjo territory, they'll use a debarker. It's less weight, goes to log yard. Anyway, you'll oftentimes see invasive species like blackberry pop up through the bark. Now, that's the thing about invasive species. They're hard to kill. That's why they're invasive. So they'll pop up through. Now, essentially what you're doing, now if you lay down enough bark, nothing will grow, which... Again, it's the same thing as the water. Nothing's going to grow. It's an option. Now, the bark will add more to the soil. It'll eventually decompose, become soil. The problem is I just see more invasives coming up through the bark than grass, just based on personal experience. It's hard to get rid of them.
Well, I'm going to defer to your experience because, for obvious reasons of a engineer in Texas versus a forester in the Northwest, I'm going to go with the forester in the Northwest, knowing more about trees.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. It's like there's the morally, like we know what's morally right, that we kill these plants, right? We come in and we kill them. Now, like I like Dan's idea, like I really do, of volunteers doing it, because that pits us and environmentalists, two enemies, against a common threat, invasive species. Both of us hate them. The labor is hard, and I'm just talking about one specific area, but as a company... Say I don't want to throw out numbers and be liable for whatever, so I'm going to throw out a rough number that is no way in shape related to form to anything I manage. Fair. Let's say 200,000 acres. We probably have like 200 acres of this kind of ground, of questionable ground, of we can't grow trees here, we can grow grass. What do we do? And some of it's right next to a road, like we said, some of it's fucking, you got to hike your ass down the bottom of the woods to get to it. Not all we can get volunteers to. Now, how do we manage that?
If I can add on to Dan's brilliant idea, what about prisoners or delinquent youth? Like make it like a program, so to speak.
That is something, and I'll get to it later on, but I mean, getting attention to your company and, again, at least in this case, like Mike's saying, trying to turn somebody's life around. And, they say no publicity is bad publicity as long as they get your name right. But, I mean, if you're really trying to do something right, I mean, I think Mike's definitely on the right track with that one.
What about turning into an addict program? Nothing says stop doing drugs like being away from everything drug related into the middle of the woods.
And on top of that, as long as you had, your company wasn't responsible for overseeing the individuals, like you might have one, say, foreman or, manager there watching, but they had their own company, like whether it's parole officers or whoever, you're like watching these folks. Mm-hmm. I mean, at that point, you're mitigating segregating, your resources, like, you're limiting the amount of resources that you're putting towards it. So, I mean, if it's one person's, salary for a day or two a week, you're definitely...
Yeah, Nick, Oregon has tons of drugs legal. I mean, there's tons of addicts. That's tons of free labor.
And we're trying to pass a bill to help those addicts. So yeah, no, that's actually a really good idea. And I'm a huge fan of convict labor. Wildland fire is pretty...
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
Well, because you're the most likely convict, which is surprising.
Thanks.
But no, like convict labor, a huge fan of, because you get a skill out of it, right? Like you come in, whatever you did to become a convict, whatever. At the end of the day, you come out with an actual skill. You become more marketable. You can create a career out of your time in prison. I mean, that's like reformation.
So let's go back to, I believe, what we were talking about last night. I mean, you were literally saying how you are severely limited in terms of, bodies to do the job. What I was going to get at before Mike brought up his wonderful idea of, using convict labor, what I was going to say is, obviously, if you're able to form a, positive relationship with the local activists and anybody who sees the forestry company, an industry, as the enemy, as someone who is not to be trusted, if you form that relationship, whether it's through social media or, you even go like big campaign style. I don't know how quote unquote hard up for cash you guys are, but I mean, I don't know if like new clients you could use, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, if you increase your advertising in some way, shape, or form, and especially if you're doing a good project like using, reforming people or just, working well with the local activists, that's killer. But we also talked about yesterday, again, getting a little off topic, at least our opinions on education. I know you guys have already done a podcast on education and how the system should be shaped or could be shaped to better, prepare people for the work world, especially when people come out of, school with zero job prospects. They're just in a very saturated market. But I really, just building towards Mike's idea, if you were to, use convict labor or even, just troubled youth, some way, shape, or form, addicts, what have you, if you were able to build a program, start a program, and ultimately reform these individuals and give them marketable skills, as you were saying, but at the same time fill the need for individuals to do the job that you guys, and like you said, you guys are severely understaffed for what you could be doing. I mean, across your industry, maybe not just your company, but across the industry. Yeah, that'd be definitely something. Okay, we're gonna form bonds with the community and just make sure that people know that we are not the bad guys. We may do things, that you guys might not like, but we are obviously always doing it in the best interest of the environment as well as our own personal interests. But you could literally form your own new employee training program through that. Now, obviously, maybe you don't hire these activists because they don't want to do the job, but I mean, at least with Mike's great suggestion, if you were able to reform individuals, whether they're young and made mistakes or older and could definitely use work, that would definitely be a nice at least starting point in teaching them and at least getting them aware of your industry. Because I guarantee, like, obviously before you started working in this industry, that was something that I didn't even think of.
Yeah, I mean, we all went to high school together in, like, the suburbs, so, like, none of us are environmental activists. Like, we grew up in the suburbs. Like, this is something we're all kind of learning now.
Absolutely. Well, and you've been doing this for how many years now?
I've only been, like, 3.5, 4 years, something like that. Yeah, it's been a while.
Well, and so to that point, so you've been doing this for 3.5, 4 years. How soon, either during college or post-college, I mean, we've only been out of school for, 4 years now, so since you graduated school, I mean, when did you really learn about that industry? I mean, you only learned about it in school, so within the past 8 years. And you were doing it for 4. I mean, to me, like, that goes to show how many people really don't know anything about, the forestry, production industry at all.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And I, again, really, like, I really enjoyed the idea of, like you said, like, either convict labor or, like, pre-labor coming in, just, like, getting the community involved. And, we, as a company, we can't financially afford to do all this stuff. Like, it may sound harsh, but we're a private company. We need to make money. If we don't make money, we go out of business, and
numbers
then
matter.
Someone else comes in who maybe doesn't care as much. Like, we have people who want to protect the environment. Like, let's keep those guys and do what we need to do. But to get the community involved, like, that's kind of what we want to do. We want to get people involved. As a company, if you're familiar with the area, we do this thing where we bring school children and we plant trees with them. We teach them how to plant trees, and then later we put up a big signs like, this is the whatever year school tree planting anniversary, and the kids can come back the next 40 years and see, I planted those trees. Like, I had this effect on the environment. But I think personally, the better effect is like I kill those invasive weeds. I protect those invasive species. And then even if they come back and they hunt and they kill a deer and elk around that area and be like, I killed this invasive species, which caused this deer or elk to come feed here. And I was able to kill said deer or elk. That's it. When people kill an animal, that's a memory that will live with them for a while. It's a very primal feeling. That's something that will live with them for a while and that will reflect with them.
So, two things. One, why don't we throw everything in the kitchen sink at them? Why don't we have, for the free labor, as Dan brought up, of volunteers, have volunteers, have social programs for drug addicts, delinquent youths, and have convicts, kind of mix them together, kind of show, that way you're getting a societal base of different backgrounds all mixed together, kind of solidifying that, hey, everyone's got the same goddamn problems, but you're also getting triple the labor force. And why not do everything you can? And my second thing is, why not introduce a native species to the location that you're currently at, like an insect or even a small mammal or even a large animal that can eat the species or destroy the species or help maintain the area. So you have a wetland, and so wetland, I think maybe frogs can help keep the blackberry out of that system. So why not introduce a native species into that area, kind of force growth of a species? So why not send everything you got at it, every option, every angle?
So what you're talking about has been done. You're talking about the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great New Deal, I believe it's called. I'm blanking on that. But so there's a disease called it's a rust fungus that
does that mainly affect trees, grasses, or
it mainly affects trees. Now, and this is the thing, it has two hosts. So during the Great New Deal, they paid people in the Pacific Northwest to roam the entire, literally every single square mile and get rid of one of the hosts of the rust fungus that affected the trees. The problem is, at the time, our science, we didn't know that this rust fungus had two hosts. So it breeds on two species and it infects your western white pines, your pines. So we had people walk every single mile of Pacific Northwest mountains, pulling one of the hosts. At the time, it wasn't visible, but it did host another species. We pulled one of the hosts, and it reduced the population, but didn't get rid of it because it still had another host. 50% of its breeding ground is still alive. So
let's do it again, folks.
Let's do it. Let's line back up. No, and that's what we talked about, this invasive species. Ideally, and that's the thing about robots, right? Drones. Cheap labor we can employ forever. Because we can have these robots go and pull these invasive species. We're not there yet. We're still facing this problem. We just don't have the technology to completely eliminate it. Whether we can and can't get rid of invasive species is an entirely different topic. We have an entire episode devoted to this, but we're not there right now. So our problem right now is, with the technology that's currently available, what are we going to do? Can we walk the entire mountain and pull the invasive species? Yeah. Can we get the labor to do it? I think that's personally doubtful. But if we use, like Dan's saying, the prison labor force more effectively, which we already do use prison labor force for firefighting pretty effectively, but if we expanded that, because let's be honest, if you're in prison, I'd rather be working out in the fucking woods every day. I don't care what I'm in prison for. Get me the fuck out of prison. I would rather do shit labor than sit around for 8 hours a day.
8 hours is being generous. And also, I think Dan's right with you spearhead with volunteers and you do whatever you can to fill up the whatever slack you need. I think the volunteer work is probably the spearhead and the point of the arrow.
And again, Mike did point it out that the volunteer portion really does depend on accessibility, or at least just the ability to get there in general. But I mean, not to get into politics and stuff like that. But I mean, really, if your company itself and maybe just more forestry companies as a whole are able to really just do more for the community. So again, we're talking, Mike mentioned it, reforming individuals and getting jobs, and just all right, this small business, even just local company is really, it's focused on the people and the environment. Government go shove off, I mean, at least that's my philosophy. If local businesses and individuals are really focused on their communities and able to keep oversight out, and I'm obviously I know you're ready to jump in and you're ready to pounce. I feel you. But I mean, if you're truly able to just try, you're actively attempting to get everybody on the same page, and like you said, pitting, two enemies against a common target, so to speak.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. I mean, if you guys are, if your company as a whole is able to just get a group of people together and just at least bond over something, even if it's something small, like, it's great for the community, and ultimately it grows. I mean, shit, if the Pacific, Northwest is able to really just make the rest of the country look like ass, like it already does, like the rest of the country really already is, except for Texas.
We're really good at making ourselves look like ass.
I mean, I can obviously not comment on that as well as you can, but I mean, seriously, if you're able to get everybody on the same page and just kind of get everybody to stop fighting about other trivial bullshit and focus on what's real and what's in front of you, again, talking about, keeping natural resources alive, taking care of our environment and what we are living with, and dealing, the problems that are facing us now immediately, and not, the trumped up BS that people all the way across the country are, trying to say that is the problem. I mean, you're, like, again, from stuff that Mike's mentioned, you mentioned, I brought up, I mean, you're really just going to set yourself up for some good success if you're able to, like, just at least get everybody on, like, starting at one point on the same page and just kind of grow from there. It's, I don't know, you guys could do a lot and really take it by the horns.
I have a dumb idea that I think would work.
Fucking time.
Here we go.
So, foresters, I would say, have some tie or at least respect for the military. Military has
National Guard.
Military has
True.
bombs and napalm.
Here we go.
Why not just use the military and private land going, hey, you don't want to test your new jet to launch said bomb this location and make it a crater?
I mean, strictly, I don't.
It would work. It would work.
I'm speaking out of pocket. Because I do not have any of the qualifications or education that Nick has in this industry. But I'm just going to say, if you nuke what his company's trying to grow and protect, I'm going to say that it's not going to quite work with the activists or his own company.
I'm not saying drop Moabs or any Tomahawks, but I am saying, hey, you got a new jet, you already got some military base out there, you need to do training exercise, drop some, carpet bombs in this location.
I like the enthusiasm. So it turns out when environmentalists don't like us applying herbicide to kill invasive species,
all right, wait, hang on.
They don't like dropping carpet bombs either. Like, it's kind of like one of their no-goes. Like,
two birds, one stone. We let them protest on the land that they don't want you to do herbicides with, and then you let the military do.
Okay, so we don't apply herbicide and then we bomb the shit out of it.
Hey, I'm just to my original point. I think that would cause some problems as well.
Well, so here's the problem with that. So what you're doing is you're essentially nuking that soil. So you're superheating it. Now the problem with superheating soil is invasive species come in because they're more adapted to it, and there's fire adapted species in the Pacific Northwest, but not as much in the area we're talking about. Yep.
Bullshit. Because we can use explosives that blow above the ground and won't nuke it, and just use sonic boom to fucking disrupt the soil. Because we can blow off the ground whatever height we want, so we can completely use air and pressure force to clear the land and create a crater without using heat.
Okay, so here's the thing. We're trying to get rid of 1.5 to 2 acres of grassland.
That's like one missile.
The trees around it, we want to keep because they're like 7, 8, 10, 15 years old, and we're going to harvest them eventually to make monies.
So we don't use RDX.
So you use like EOD C4
instead. Bunker bombs. All right. All right,
it
Cheney,
would work.
calm down.
It would work. Listen, you just don't use RDX. You use like C4. You use a lower impact explosive. Blow it above the ground. The trees have deep enough roots that it wouldn't get blown over. Granted, they might lose some branches and leaves, but it would clear the soil. It would clear the land.
Look, I am 1,000% for using explosives to solve 90% of my problems. If you think that environmentalists were pissed at us using herbicides to control invasive species, I feel like they're going to be a lot more pissed about using fucking explosives to control invasive species.
Ladies and gentlemen listening, we have definitely taken a turn here.
But not a bad turn.
Not a bad turn.
A very interesting one. Like, I'm down. Like, don't get me wrong. If you are literally giving me the power to use explosives, I'm not going to say for no.
Oh, once again, I'm all for it myself.
Yeah, I am pro explosives. I want to put that on the record.
But this seems like a limbo where the private industry wouldn't take the blame because it's the military doing the bombing.
Oh, because the military has never garnered any sort of negative press before.
No, exactly. You could pass the bad press onto the military as a private institute. I don't think the military would even blink of bad press because, I mean, they're used to
To
it.
be
might
fair,
not
they
blink,
get very
but-
little good press.
They do get very little good press.
So-
However, you're already talking about our military-industrial complex, which I couldn't even give you an accurate number on what they currently cost. Like 666 trillion or billion was when we were in high school. It's probably close to $1 trillion nowadays, 8+ years later. But now you have again, not to get too political, you have a one-sided party coverage of all of
now
our
you're-
branches.
The problem is, like Dan's saying, the problem who's okay with using the military to solve problems doesn't give a shit about invasive species.
No. Here's the thing. This is the perfect because you can use the military as a scapegoat. You wouldn't get private blame as a private industry. You'd get the blame of saying, "Hey, we're just trying to solve invasive species, and the government gave us this much so and so." So the government would take the blame of it. So you're passing the blame off to the government, not the private industries. Granted, I'm not for passing the blame, but it seems like a very tactical decision.
I'm not for passing the blame, but if we're gonna pass the blame, I'm okay with blaming the government. Let's pass the blame to them.
It just seems like it could be very useful to use it as open training ground. So, like I said mentioned earlier in the podcast with flamethrowers, why not have we don't use flamethrowers anymore in the division, but we do use like elephants and Abrams tanks that have mine clearing equipment on their vehicles. So why not use that equipment in that land as testing ground? So it's 2 birds, 1 stone.
See, now you're getting on something I could definitely get behind because, I mean, not to get way off topic here for a second, but if anybody here is familiar with the show Top Gear with 3 crazy British boys who ended up going off and doing their own thing with Amazon, at one point there was one episode where they used former military equipment that was used for clearing mines in, Afghanistan and Iraq and such, to destroy a house. Now, if you were able to, the newest version of those technology, obviously that equipment was older and, had been used at some point or another. If you were able to use the newest generation of mine clearing technology by the military to clear this invasive species out, and so basically someone digs out the land for Nick's company, that I think you could definitely get behind. Oh, well, the military is literally just testing our newest mine or bomb clearing technology, and they ended up only clearing out some invasive species of blueberry. That would be one hell of a story for someone to put out.
We would definitely have to close the area to hunting.
While they were working at that point, for sure.
Yeah, we don't want to put landmines down and then be like, yeah, come in and use this grassland to hunt elk.
So at that point, I'm saying you don't even actually put down any sort of explosives. Now, while that would be fun as hell, if literally all you did, because I mean, you both are fairly well versed in such technology and vehicles that are used to clear tanks. There's something simple as it literally just looks like 3 mini wrecking balls on chains being spun around, and it gets dropped on the ground, and it just again, it vibrates the ground, hitting it, beating it over and over. And at some point, you're going to set off a bomb. But there are others that are literally just giant augers that you just drop into the ground. And it just has a massive piece of metal in between the auger and the machine to keep the operator safe. Without using any sort of explosives, if you just literally, hey, we just want to test the newest version of this machine without any explosives, and just have them drive around the area that Nick has talked about, you're wasting some gas. You're paying 1 soldier to do it. And if they tackle all of the blueberries, say for maybe even a small space just to keep the trees safe, stay away from their roots. I mean, that would be one hell of a story. Like, hey, the military is pairing up with, the forestry industry and just taking care of invasive species in their own way.
So the current elephants, if I'm not mistaken, besides having magnetic pulses going to the ground for ground penetrating radar, they also use kind of plows into the ground to pick up stuff which are explosive, which break off and such, which I can see very easily plowing the land. But I can also using, I believe it's barbed wire clearing. So pretty much, for those listening, imagine a harpoon with a bunch of rope at the end of it. That rope happens to be det cord. You can launch that and clear that, but here's the thing. You don't have to use just det cord. You can coat the outside casing with a herbicide. You can coat the outside with a seeding, which gets blasted by the sonic boom. You can use that explosives to help spread seed distribution. And I see if you want free labor and you can't get volunteers because some deep land, seems like a perfect reason for some trainee for someone out of a basic training, or someone going for sniper school or some training going, hey, come out here, work out here. This is where your land is. Keep the land clean because this is our training area during on off season, etc.
Yeah, and I think you're leading into, and that's the hard part about land management is it touches so many different things, whether it's be private property, who's operating, whatever. But if we used, like you say, explosives, like we'd have an area and say that's where they want to train, like no worries. But like that area is going to be like scheduled to burn because we're going to reduce the amount of potential for that explosive going off and then starting wildfire.
This is all biased because I want to blow stuff up, so keep that in mind.
And I want to burn pretty much everything to reduce the wildfire potential. So again, biased.
Using that land for other than forestry, maybe make it like a fishing lodge. Maybe use that renting it out or something like that. This is kind of a snowball.
I mean, so the problem is it's not on like a SSBT with salmon, steelhead, bull, trout stream.
You're messing your words up more than I am, and I'm enjoying this.
This is our third fucking episode today, so you're.
And to be fair, y'all have been hammering. But to be fair, y'all have been hammering them back. So
what? But yeah, no, so yes, it could be used as some kind of fishing ranch.
Or hunting lodge or something.
It could, and that's the thing. And I think in the future, looking in the future, we're about to see a lot of land trades. Very small land trades, but land trades that will affect the entire country just because we're about to see a lot of ground go from industrial forestry to private ownership. We're about to see a lot more construction of houses, businesses, areas that had previously been forest just because of environment regulations. And
I want to say in the beginning, you said the very beginning, should we do nothing? I don't think doing nothing is the right choice for that situation.
No, and that's something I wanted to touch on is doing nothing is really regarded as an option, and I think it's fucking stupid. Doing nothing is it's tough for me to do literally nothing because, like I said, this land, if we don't do anything, which is it like Mike said, it's an option. We can do nothing. We can let blackberries just overtake everything. That's fine. Is that right? I think most people would say no.
Absolutely not. I mean, again, like for my viewpoint is from the business standpoint. That's what I went to school for. I'm an investor, I'm an entrepreneur, blah 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 blah. So that's why I'm looking at it definitely from a different perspective as you, and definitely from Mike. But I mean, if you guys are able to minimize, focusing your resources on this problem, which again, it may not be the most urgent issue that you need to deal with at this point in time, but after a couple weeks, a month, even a year, it all of a sudden is overgrown and it's like, oh shit, we need to take care of this now. I mean, if you're able to minimize your own focus and risk on that, like you put somebody on there to take care of it, whether it's, again, I know you said herbicides are bad, but whether you use herbicides or you use
explosives.
I'm always a big fan of explosives.
Or you use explosives or you use flamethrowers. And such. Biggest thing, I mean, just from the business standpoint, lower costs, increased margin, all that kind of jazz. So if you're able to just put it forward, and not cost you anything, but also give yourself the positive boost of, working with the community and working with volunteers or building a reform program through the convict system, the prison system, like Mike mentioned earlier. I mean, for me, that's the way to go. Don't get me wrong. All of a sudden, you bring explosives and military into it. Like, okay, that sounds like bang up fucking fun.
Like a good fucking time.
Exactly. But, I mean, from the business standpoint, it doesn't cost you guys a dime. You get positive exposure. I mean, again, like, technically, there's no bad publicity as long as they get your name right. But if you're doing nothing but good and you build that publicity as well, I mean, that's the way to go.
No, I'm not going to lie. I really like Dan's idea of bringing, like, essentially, quote unquote, our enemy into the fold.
Free labor or something.
Free labor or just people, because that's the conundrum about the forest products industry is we like to think of ourselves as environmentalists, and I think we qualify. We are on the same side as a lot of the quote unquote environmentalists, and yet we are tearing each other's throats. Neither of us want invasive species to populate the entire landscape. That seems like something we could all rally around. And Dan's right. Like, we could help. We could use these people who want to help but don't know what to do. If we could organize them, just literally social media could help us do that. That's like such a good fucking idea. Like I said, I brought this to you guys because I don't know what the fuck to do. It's a conundrum.
Facebook group, it sounds like the easiest solution to it, what Dan was saying with volunteers.
I mean, absolutely. And whether or not you want to promote your exact company, right now. But I mean, again, you guys use your own personal pages. I'm sure you guys have them just for the sake of having them and nobody's stealing your, intellectual property, so to speak. I mean, that's not right. But taking your domain really is the way to get it.
But yeah, Dan's completely right. Like this, we found a unique opportunity of where environmentalists and foresters, people who quote unquote profit off the environment, and people who want to protect the environment, we can meet here in the middle. And this is our opportunity to build a relationship between the two, to say we have common interest and common goals. We need help because we can't pay for this. Like, it financially doesn't make sense. And I like to be what I call a practical philosopher. Understand what's right and wrong, but I also understand the economy. Those two things are very different. We need to do both of those. We want to understand, we know what's right, but how do we pay for it? Well, that's an entirely different question.
It seems like there's a lot of solutions, a lot of possibilities, all that need to be weighed and measured. It's a complex question for a very simple task of, hey, how do we use this land and keep invasive species out? But it's not so cut and dry.
Essentially, what we're saying is, pokey plant bad, get rid of it.
Well, we reached the pinnacle of Nick's conversation skills. So if you have any ideas, I would love to hear what your ideas are, and I'm sure Nick would love to hear other people's opinions to try to get whatever they can. And Nick, where can they tell us the ideas that they come up with?
Find us on YouTube and on Instagram. It'll also be there as well.
Can they find us on Twitter?
No, because no good ideas actually ever come from Twitter.
And Dan, if we want to find more of you, what is your handle or notification?
Well, I'm not that special, but I do have an Instagram. My handle is at DanRamTheMan22. If y'all want to mention the Backyard Philosophy Podcast, whenever you message me, I'm a private profile. I don't like talking to weirdos, but if you got some good conversation, I'm always down.
And I must say, thank you for our first guest on the podcast, Mr. Dan Ramirez. Bravo, and thank you. And any final words, gentlemen?
Again, thank you for having me. I am definitely severely unqualified for this topic, but I had a great time talking with my friends about, a pretty important, issue.
Well, I think we hit a broad stroke of possibilities for this complex problem. And as always, I want to say thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We rarely finish a podcast without missing a point we wanted to bring up, so let us know what we forgot. And if you have a topic you want us to talk about, let us know at backyardphilosophy